Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Views on News. I'm Taimur Shamil. President Trump has called off the peace deals with the Taliban, and this happened recently because President Trump was furious with the attack that was carried out by the Taliban in Kabul, which killed an American official, and this deal was called off. 19 years in the war, 18 years, we are going to enter the 19th year. This is the longest war of the United States anywhere ever. And Taliban have been fighting the United States, NATO forces. They don't accept the Kabul government. Kabul government too is so many years on, still weak. They don't control many parts of Afghanistan, and many parts of Afghanistan are contested between the Taliban and the Kabul government. 9 rounds of talks have taken place in Qatar between Zalmay Khalilzad, the American envoy, and the Taliban. They have worked out on these talks, but so far we see that nothing substantial is happening. Though President Trump himself said that there was a deal, and the Taliban and the Afghan president were scheduled to visit DC and the Camp David. They were going to meet in the Camp David and talk about peace in Afghanistan, but that didn't happen because there was an attack in Kabul. Many people are skeptic about this statement of President Trump. They think that because 11 September was there, this was not the right time. Perhaps US government was thinking something else. Trump administration was thinking something else. So things are very tricky in Afghanistan at the moment. If we look at the timeline of what has been happening in Afghanistan, as I said, things are interesting. There have been lots of meetings between the American envoy and the Taliban. But the bigger question is now that what is going to be the future of Afghanistan? 28th of September is the scheduled day for the presidential elections. Would presidential elections take place in Afghanistan this month or not? This is going to be a big question. If they take, would there be violence? Would Taliban accept this presidential election? President Ghani is very active in running the campaigns, a couple of other contestants as well. What is going to be the future, the political future of Afghanistan, deal or no deal in both scenarios? What is going to be the future of Afghanistan? We're going to discuss about this with our special guest in the studios. Our first guest is Dr. Nazir Mahmood. He is an expert on Pakistan's foreign policy and foreign affairs. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Our second guest is Air Vice Marshal Faiz Amir, renowned senior analyst on Pakistan's external affairs, and he's also the Vice Chancellor of Air University Islamabad. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Mahmood, starting with this, the statement, President Trump has called off the peace deal with the Taliban because of the attack in Kabul. How do you see this decision and America not going for any further talks, peace talks with the Taliban?
Well, this decision I think was very unexpected because the events that took place immediately before this decision over a week or two, we see the 9th round was completed. Led by Zalmay Khalilzad, and after that 9th round, in the 9th round also, as we know that in that discussion, present Afghan government does not participate. It is between Zalmay Khalilzad and the Taliban representatives. But they had reached an agreement, and that agreement Zalmay Khalilzad apparently took with him to Kabul, and in fact he showed it to Ashraf Ghani also, that this is what we have agreed. And the points, there were 4 major points. One was the ceasefire, the second was withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, the third was the future setup, and the fourth was the status of women in the future setup. But out of those 4 points, only 2 were mostly discussed in all 9 rounds. Yeah. And these were American withdrawal that Taliban wanted as early as possible, and America wanted ceasefire. So at least some progress was being made, and in fact Trump wanted it to be a big event at Camp David. Right. Now Camp David is kind of a sacred place. Why I'm saying that? Because not everybody goes there. As we see during the past 70 or 75 years that Camp David has been used only twice or thrice.
Special meetings.
Special meetings. The most important was in 1978, the Camp David agreement between Israel and Egypt.
Right.
And then after that in 2000 also led by Clinton, another agreement between Palestine, Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak meeting. So that means this was a big deal. And I think Trump, as Trump is known for, he takes his own unilateral personal decisions. Probably he did not discuss with his administration. John Bolton was against it. He was removed. Even Foreign Minister, Secretary of the State for Foreign Affairs.
Against the talks or against inviting them to
Camp David? Oh yes, he was hawk of the hawks, as they say. So he was against that. He was against, Bolton was against Iran also. Bolton was against North Korean meeting also.
Right.
But as we see, Donald Trump, President of America, is a very unpredictable person.
Right.
That means he takes decisions and he takes a U-turn also very quickly. So this was very unexpected.
So this was unexpected. Air Vice Marshal Hamid, how do you see now the future of Afghanistan? Call of the deal, Taliban, how would they react to it? 28th September, the date of elections, presidential elections in Afghanistan. Would that take place? What would be the scenario in Afghanistan?
Last year when the negotiations started, probably in July, one wondered who would be the guarantor on the Taliban side, who would guarantee their part of the agreement. But little we knew that it was the Zalmay Khalilzad who did not have a guarantor. So he had an agreement with the Taliban, and he goes home and the deal is called off. So that depicts a complete collapse of the American administration. One expects from a superpower that when they enter into negotiations, they already have decided on the outcome, on the result of the negotiations. Where do they want to reach? What outcome would they like to have? And they play around that outcome and they try and bring their opposition to that outcome. Now here, once Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad probably had 9 rounds of talks, and he had returned to United States 10 times. One, it was obvious that he had briefed, that he was constantly in touch with his boss, Pompeo, the Secretary of State, and Mr. Pompeo was also in touch with the President, and they probably together were progressing, monitoring the progress. Now here, once the talks break down and the American president declares them as dead, now one wonders that what would happen to Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad when he returns to talk, whenever, if and whenever, would the Taliban believe him? Or what kind of guarantees would they ask from Zalmay Khalilzad?
Of credibility.
Of credibility. So here's a president, here's a superpower that loses its credibility for whatever reason. So that is the most dangerous thing.
But the question is also very interesting, that while Taliban want to talk to United States, they knew that they were going to visit Camp David. Why would they attack, let's say, an installation in Kabul?
No,
and
I think
of course they know United States.
There were two views about Taliban visiting Camp David. Taliban wanted that the agreement that they had reached with Zalmay Khalilzad should be signed in a neutral place before they actually go and meet the President Trump.
Yes, yeah.
Probably they wanted to sign it right at Doha and then go, because probably they were apprehensive of what could happen at Camp David, where they could have been presented with a fait accompli. So they were adamant, they were demanding that the agreement must be signed at Doha. So I'm not sure that Taliban would have relented on this demand of theirs or not. But now when you see at the future of the talks, we were always of the opinion in these programs that after the talks are concluded at Doha and before they are approved by Washington, there would be an escalation from the Taliban side, because they would like to exert as much pressure on as they can on the Americans to ratify whatever they had reached. And precisely that happened.
Right.
Because it is customary, it is normal, it is understandable, it is historical that both sides try to gain leverage on before and after they reach an agreement, so that the agreement is either not scuttled or their terms are agreed to.
Right.
So it was very understandable that the Taliban would continue to exert pressure. Just 2 weeks back, maybe last week, 2 Americans were killed in North, and the talks were not called off. But now one of them losing their lives tragically, the president goes ahead and calls off talks. So I think it is just that because of the internal dissensions between in the administration itself. And two very vocal critics were Lindsey Graham, the Senator Lindsey Graham, and John Bolton, who had to probably lose his job, and other critics.
Right.
Another one important factor was, let me just conclude, the timing of the invitation to Camp David. It was just a couple of days before 9/11.
3 days before
And
9/11, yes.
It was the Taliban who were blamed, rightly or wrongly, for the losses at on 9/11. So it was very probably people thought it was insensitive on the part of the administration to invite the same people to Camp David to grant them that honor to ink an agreement at Camp David. So probably this also ached many people. The timing of the entire setup.
And perhaps the Trump administration might have been thinking on or revising this tragedy of...
So now they found a chance to reset the entire table for talks again. But again, would the Taliban be ready to come again and trust the... and maybe they just refuse to talk to Zalmi Khalilzad. We never know.
What you have said is very important because New York Times has reported the same. Mujib Mashal, he has said in a recent report yesterday and day before yesterday, when the talks were called off, he said that Taliban actually didn't agree with the United States on those terms and conditions that Khalilzad said would be acceptable to the president. And they were thinking that perhaps they need more time to talk on those terms and conditions. They weren't ready for that. But why is, Dr. Mahmood, US wants to push or, let's say, hurry up with this whole process of peace in Afghanistan, or withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan? What's the hurry?
In fact, it has been going on for almost 2 decades. So as we see, I mean, why this hurry? Because this was one of Trump's promises when he came to power. Even before coming to power, when he was leading his presidential campaign, he said that ideally American troops should have been withdrawn 6 years earlier. That's what he said in 2016. And he said that in 2010, when Barack Obama had his surge, when he increased number of soldiers, so that was his promise. So if we look at the background, how the number of soldiers increased. Now, when the war started in 2001, in 2002, there were only 5,000 soldiers. This is very interesting, under George W. Bush. And every year, 5,000 soldiers increased. And then by the time of 2008, there were only 30,000 soldiers. And when in 2008, Barack Obama was elected, immediately he doubled the number of soldiers to 65,000 in 2009. Right. And in 2010 and 11, they had 110,000 soldiers. This was the highest surge. And then they started decreasing. And by the time Trump came to power, there were only 8,000. And then when he came to power, rather than further decreasing, he had to increase and send 5,000 more. So presently the situation is there are 14,000 soldiers. And coming to your question, why this hurry? Because next year elections are due. And of course, Trump also wants to show something that what he promised, he is delivering on it. Right. So he wants to get out of Afghanistan somehow. And that's why he wants to reach an agreement so that he can pull out the remaining soldiers. Otherwise, he would be failing on his promise. So that was the primary reason, number one. Number two, the number of soldiers killed or total casualties, if we look at, around 200,000 people have been killed in the entire war from 2001. And out of that, the number of American soldiers is 2,300. And 75,000 Afghan security personnel and 125,000 civilians have been killed. So if you look at this, Afghans have been the main losers and they have lost much more than America could have ever lost. Right. So that's why probably Taliban are also desperate and they are still attacking. And coming back to your point, why Taliban are attacking, I think that was Taliban's mistake. Right. They should not have kept...
Using violence as leverage.
Yes, using violence. You know, they have increased number of attacks. On one side, you are negotiating a peace deal, and on the other side, you keep attacking and then taking on responsibility also. Whenever they attack, people are killed and they say, yes, we did it. Now, this makes position of Trump also vulnerable, and American administration uses this against the Taliban.
So who benefits from this situation, was Mashlamir, from US and Taliban not talking to each other? Because President Ghani was also skeptic about these talks, even about the terms and conditions that were agreed between Taliban and United States, so much so that he He wanted Pompeo to show him, as Khalilzad to show him those those terms and conditions between the US and Taliban. Who is going to benefit from this situation?
One may agree or disagree on who would gain on the in this pause in the talks or the delay in the talks, but definitely it is the Afghan people who are going to lose, because the Mr. Trump announced that they have hit the Taliban very hard in the last 4 days, harder than they have been hit in the last 12 years. So that means there has been an escalation on both sides. It is not only the Americans that are hitting the Talibans, but probably Taliban would also come back and reply. And who dies, who suffers, who loses lives and property are the Afghan people. So that is, and the second party that probably would lose is Pakistan. Pakistan would be again under tremendous pressure to bring back Taliban, not only bring back them to the table, but also to force them to not resort to any more violence. So there will be greater pressure on Pakistan to bring back the Talibans to the table on an agreement, on a term TORs that probably would suit to the Americans.
So can we?
Now,
can Pakistan pursue them? Let's say persuade them or convince them to do it.
Pakistan has played definitely some role in the past in bringing Taliban to the table and motivating them, persuading them to continue the talks over the last 9 rounds. So I think they would still be expecting, and there will be a lot of pressures on Pakistan to do better. Who gains most is probably Ashraf Ghani. Ashraf Ghani gains because the 28 September elections, now the Americans, there's a likelihood, I'm not sure, but there's a likelihood that to put pressure on the Taliban, they might go ahead with the presidential elections. And that itself would escalate the violence in Afghanistan, because Taliban has said that they will not let the elections take place, or they would probably disrupt the elections. So what I'm seeing is, either way, there's a greater intensity to the conflict, and Mr. Ashraf Ghani probably would like at any cost the elections to go ahead, and he is likely to win those elections. So he thinks that his hands would be stronger when it comes back to table on the part 2 of the peace deal, which will be the intra-Afghan negotiations. So he thinks that only then, if he's re-elected, he will have a stronger hand in his talks with the Taliban. So I think the party that stands to gain is Ashraf Ghani. There'll be greater pressure on Pakistan. The people of Afghanistan will lose, and probably even Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad will need to muster a lot of courage to come back to Doha and face those same people.
To Taliban again. We are going to continue our discussion from this point that President Trump has called off the deal, and the pressure certainly, as Airwas Mashlami said, would be on the people of Afghanistan, on Pakistan somewhat, and also certainly on Zalmay Khalilzad, the American envoy, to come back, gather up his courage to talk to the Taliban again. Would he? And what would be the scenario and future of the peace talks between Taliban and US? We're going to discuss about this after this break. Stay with us.
Passion for polo will be the highest on the world's highest polo ground. Shandur invites visitors to experience a traditional polo tournament between the teams of Chitral and Gilgit. The tournament is held on Shandur Pass, the highest polo ground in the world, at 3,700 meters above sea level. The first time a polo tournament took place on the Shandur Pass was in 1936. It is a place unique and exotic in itself, surrounded by some of the most spectacular mountain scenery in the world. The event marks the annual rivalry between the teams of Chitral and Gilgit. The polo tournament has some added attractions for the visitors: trout fishing at the nearby streams and lakes, and a festival of folk dances and music of northern Pakistan. The event in itself offers a fascinating insight into the lifestyle of the people of this region. Their culture and indigenous customs are a delight to behold for the visitors. Crystal clear lakes, snow-covered mountains, alpine flowers, and vast stretches of green grass are added attractions. Fairs and festivals of Pakistan.
Welcome back. We are discussing the future of the peace talks between United States and Taliban. President Trump has called off the peace talks, and the situation certainly is very unpredictable, uncertain, as Afghanistan has been in last couple of decades and especially in last 18 years. Dr. Mahmood, implications for Pakistan are certainly very serious, as Ebas Mashlami was saying. The pressure would be on Pakistan.
Yes.
We release Mullah Brother so that Taliban can talk to the United States. Also, many people are of the view that Pakistan should not overcommit, let's say, its role in Afghanistan, because we have seen some people are of the view that it has been some sort of a thankless job for Pakistan. We have been trying our best. We have been out of the way at times, extra mile for United States in Afghanistan, but there has been blame game from the Afghanistan side as well, somewhat from the United States side as well. Do more and all that, and that in different way still continues. How do you see the situation for Pakistan?
The situation is not good, and there are solid reasons for that. Why? Because we have been claiming and proudly claiming that we have been the ones who persuaded Taliban to join these talks. We have been taking pride in it. That, you know, Taliban, we are facilitating it. Now, on one side, this is good, but on the other side, it also gives a message to the world community that we have some influence over Afghanistan, over Taliban. Now, the question is, once we are able to persuade them to talk, America and the rest of the world, Western powers, they think that Pakistan should be able to influence them also to stop violence. And somehow Pakistan has not been able to do that because probably Pakistan does not have that much influence to stop violence.
Or even when we were trying to persuade them, let's say, or convince them, we saw that what happened in when the Murray peace talks were going on, with the news of death of Mullah Umar, later Akhtar Mansoor was killed, and now this thing has happened again.
And these, you know, Mullah Akhtar Mansoor was killed in Pakistan, other, you know, Mullah brother was in Pakistan's custody. So Pakistan somehow facilitated these talks. So now it is tough for Pakistan to persuade to the world that Taliban are not listening to us, because it has a 25-year history. Now, emergence of Taliban started in 1995. 1996, they occupied Kabul. So it's 25-year history. The first from 95 to 2001, Pakistan recognized Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Only policy changed after Pervez Musharraf changed policy. Right. So we had an about turn. Otherwise, before that, there were only 3 countries that recognized Taliban as the legitimate government. So the world perception has this background. Now, for Pakistan, what is the way forward for Pakistan? Number one, the pressure will continue that Pakistan should persuade and somehow stop this violence from Taliban's side. So Pakistan will be under pressure. And secondly, now thinking, if some people and some lobby in Pakistan thinks that involving Taliban in the Afghan government will be beneficial for Pakistan, I have serious doubts about that also. Because once you involve Taliban in the government, before involving Taliban in the government, they have to renounce violence, and they have to commit to the world, as these were the points of discussion also, that they will not try to re-establish that primitive medieval type of government that they had for 5 years.
Right.
So if they are able to convince, then probably Pakistan will be in a better position. Otherwise, if they keep repeating the same mistake, Taliban's, that will be bad for Pakistan also.
But do you think, Mashlami, that Taliban have also learned, let's say, a lesson in Afghanistan. They ruled for 5 years and then this war. They have been attending the Moscow peace talks and they have been meeting even the women over there. Afghan women have been representing the different factions of Afghanistan. Do you think that Taliban have changed?
We all thought, and probably more so the Americans, that Taliban have war fatigue. And probably they would be in a hurry to conclude. They were negotiating or they were keeping up with the pace of Zalmay Khalilzad just because they wanted to conclude an agreement. But if you look at the previous 1 month, last 1 month, Taliban had escalated their attacks in Kunduz, in Baghlan, in other provinces. 7, 8 provinces they attacked. They almost overran, not overran, but parts of Kunduz they overran. So I don't think that Taliban have become very strong in negotiations. They have been on and off negotiating with the Americans, with Pakistanis, with other people, with the French, with Chinese, with Russians, with Qataris, with Saudis. So I think they have very clear understanding of what they want to do. If we talk of this agreement or this had been agreement, there was no mention of a ceasefire between Taliban and the American and Zalmay Khalilzad or the American side as part of this agreement. What probably the Taliban had indicated was that they will stop attacking the US forces once the agreement is signed. But a comprehensive ceasefire would only be reached with the after the intra-Afghan talks. So I think if Mr. Trump has gone back on his words or on the words of Zalmay Khalilzad, I think he's gone back on a very flimsy reason. Though one definitely takes the loss of life, whether it was American or whether it was 11 other Afghans, that is tragic. But he just looked at a reason to call off the talks. Now, when you talk of the resumption in talks, probably a lot of CBMs would be required. Confidence building measures between Pakistan and US, between Pakistan and Taliban, Taliban and US. Probably Taliban would definitely require now guarantees or ask for guarantees that any future agreement would be kept, would be honored. Those guarantees they will not only seek from the US, but probably they'll also seek from Pakistan. So I think there is going to be a talks that will take place, and before those things are possible, and they might already be underway. They might already be underway a way of finding back to Doha or any other place. But I think it would be difficult. Pakistan would find it pretty difficult to convince Taliban, and Pakistan would find it very difficult to convince Americans that it has lesser leverage because of the recent setback that they received in Doha or DC. I think that would be a very daunting task for Pakistan to persuade the Afghans or the Taliban to come back.
And in this condition, in these circumstances, Pakistan and US relations are also very crucial, Dr. Mahmood.
Oh, yes.
Recently, Prime Minister Imran Khan visited the United States with top Pakistani official from the army side as well. They met their counterparts in the United States, in DC. What is going to be the future of Pakistan-US relations? Because if this thing, let's say, doesn't happen anytime soon, what is going to be because many people call this relationship somewhat transactional relationship as well. It's very realist from a realist point of view. It's give and take. It's about benefiting from the situation.
Well, again, Pakistan's relations with the US have been at the lowest ebb. We were expecting that after Prime Minister Imran Khan's visit, there would be some improvement. But as I mentioned earlier, that President Trump is a fickle and unpredictable personality. So on one side, he said that he was ready to negotiate and mediate between Pakistan and India. And on the other side, he didn't do much when India annexed Kashmir. So that shows that, it is very difficult to believe what President Trump says and what he means. These probably are two different things. So, and because of that, the relations have been at the lowest ebb.
So do you equate Kashmir, let's say, in this example, Kashmir with Afghanistan, because they are concerned about Afghanistan, we are concerned about Afghanistan and Kashmir as well. Do you equate these two things?
Well, we can't exactly equate them, but when we talk about relation between Pakistan and the US,
yes.
both emerge as important issues.
Yes.
Kashmir and Afghanistan. And another factor is that we have not discussed up till now is both Kashmir and Afghanistan, India's involvement has been there. One of Pakistan's concern was that India is using the present Afghan government against Pakistan, infiltration of terrorists supported by RAW or whatever. Pakistan thinks that India is doing it. Pakistan blames that. So it is on both sides. So I think that Pakistan's relation with the US will depend on a couple of things. Number one, the US foreign policy, at this moment, it is not very clear what they want. Unless they come out very clearly, they are actually interested in peace, or they will continue negotiating and then backing off, then negotiating and then backing off, then that does not leave much space for Pakistan also to do much. Because, in this unpredictable situation, what would Pakistan do?
But ultimately, peace is something that we want. If we have a stable and peaceful neighborhood, Afghanistan, it is going to benefit us. So I think
for Taliban, now one more thing. Yes, you are very right. I must remind that, during the past 18 years or so, there have been multiple loya jirgas. There have been elections. No matter they were not, as fair and free as we expect them to be, but there have been elections in Afghanistan in 2004, 2009, 2014. Taliban have boycotted all elections. They have boycotted all loya jirgas. They have refused to talk to the government in power in Kabul. Now, this attitude puts Pakistan also in a difficult situation.
Right.
So Pakistan's, if Pakistan is able to somehow change Taliban's attitude, which I doubt will happen.
Right.
So in near future, what I see escalation in violence.
Right.
Because Taliban will probably start attacking more. In retaliation, US will also start attacking Taliban. So more bloodshed, and I also see more troubled borderline between Pakistan and Afghanistan. There may be some, Taliban infiltration and attacks within Pakistan. Who knows?
Well, let's see, because we have been fencing our borders, we have been doing our best, but still, the future of Pakistan and US relationship, Abbas Mashal Amir, how do you see that?
There's a thinking at in DC that to put pressure on the Taliban, the US government should bring Pakistan closer to it and offer a free trade agreement to Pakistan, so that Pakistan sees more rewards or compensation and gets closer with the American government, comes under the pressure. They have more leverage, and that probably would coax or persuade the Taliban to come closer to come for the talks to the table. But one is very apprehensive. If you look at two major agreements that the United States has pulled out, one was the JCPOA, and second one was the Taliban talks with the Taliban, the agreement with the Taliban. So should Pakistan be so much eager to trust the Americans' offers that they might offer as lollipops or as peanuts, as it was said in the history, to toe the American line? Another thing that makes the entire situation very fuzzy is just today's development, where Mike Pompeo announced that there might be a meeting between the American president and the Iranian president on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting.
Yeah.
And immediately there was a denial by the Iranian government that there's no going to be any such meeting unless the sanctions, draconian sanctions against Iran are lifted by the US government. So what you see is a turmoil, a message of turmoil, a message of indecision from DC, and it would make it difficult for not only American closer friends, but for closer allies like us, like Pakistan, to believe anything that Americans or the US government tells us now. So I think the American and the Pakistani relationship or the relationship is going to remain in a flux for a couple of weeks before we are able to discern what actually is coming out of Washington.
We have Mr. Tahir Khan with us, renowned senior journalist and expert on Afghanistan affairs with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Mr. Tahir Khan, welcome to the show. Talking about this statement by the US President, he has called off the peace talks with the Taliban. How do you see this decision, and what is going to be the future of Afghanistan and these peace talks?
I think the decision is, many would see, is very disappointing, unexpected, and it should not happen. Yesterday, when the Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen was speaking to a Taliban website, Al-Imara, he was saying there was no indication in the 9th round, even in the final days, because he says that the Americans, NY, and the Taliban, they had handed over the final draft to the Qatari government, and the Qatari government was in the process of finalizing the date to formally announce this. So there was no indication, but unfortunately, this announcement came to make surprise many people, and it was not expected. But, and you say what would happen, because now President Trump almost daily he's saying the peace process is dead. So when he said this, and even today he said that they have, over the past 4 days, they have badly hit the Taliban. So I think once again, my opinion is when he announced in 2017 the South Asian policy. So the focus was on use of military force against the Taliban. But what happened? There was nothing in 1 year. That's why the Americans, Donald Trump announced a special envoy for Afghanistan peace, and the negotiation was started. And it was started basically in July when LSL for the first time met with the Taliban, but formally started in October. And both sides did a lot to reach an agreement, and they reached an agreement, but unfortunately. And now you say, what will happen now? So I think now the situation is that there will be confusion. Maybe there is a surge in the fighting, in more attacks, but I don't think, if they could not win this war, if they could not, now the Taliban started from south, from the Pashtun area. Now, yesterday even, they took control of two districts in the northern provinces. Few days ago, they were just at the edge of Kunduz. And now they are fighting in the western side. I'm not talking about the south, in Pashtun, but near the Iranian border, the Farah and the Herat. So the Taliban are, and even every report by the American military, the quarterly report, CIGAR military report, now the Taliban, according to them, they are controlling more than 40% area. So if this is the situation, how can they win if they could not win in the 18 and 19 years? So I think, again, they will be coming to this negotiation table. And the Taliban response, I think, was very mature, because they did not talk about, they said that they are still expect. And even Pakistan also want that this thing should, the talks should resume. Today, the foreign minister of Pakistan said the talks should begin again, because Pakistan had a role in this. But now there is confusion in Afghanistan. Many people were expecting that there would be a peace deal. So the intra-Afghan dialogue started. But unfortunately, now this process is stopped. But the important thing is, what would Trump say when Khalil Zad beat him, and maybe in the coming days? So because Khalil Zad was not alone when he was talking to the Taliban. He would be always accompanied by the defense official, the intelligence official. Even in the last few days.
Mr. Tahir Khan, Mr. Tahir Khan, my question is briefly, how is the Kabul government looking at this decision? And who is going to benefit, let's say, from this statement of President Trump that he has called off the peace process?
The Kabul government formal reaction was also, to some extent, very positive. Only they were blaming the Taliban for this war, and they were asking the Taliban to come to direct talk with the Afghan government. I think now many people are talking about the intra-Afghan dialogue. Even yesterday, the UN Secretary General also said the same thing. So now the focus could be on, but now Taliban are also now discussing, reviewing the options, because I think that they may be approaching to some countries which they have very good relation, like Russia, maybe Iran, maybe China, could be Central Asian countries. So Taliban are also now reviewing their options, but the response from the Afghan government was not very. It was also very positive response from the Afghan government, because they know that if again there is surge in fighting, more attacks, more violence, so they will also suffer. And it was President Ghani promised during the election that he would be working on for peace process. If he does not honor that commitment with the people of Afghanistan, so then because people suffer more. Like yesterday in Maidan, where a family was killed by the U.S. Jets, and a few days ago, common people, civilians were killed in Nangarhar. Now, mostly civilians are being killed, and there is a pressure on the Afghan government to go for the peace.
Right, Mr. Tahir Khan, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Dr. Mahmood, the situation in Afghanistan, Mr. Tahir Khan just summed it up. Now, the future of this peace process and how China and Russia and regional countries are looking at it, because this is very important. There have also been talks parallel to the Qatar talks in Moscow, and China also invited the Taliban. There were reports in the media. How is China and Russia looking at this whole situation?
Well, they have not issued any, I have not seen, if they have, I have not seen any statement from Russia or China in the past 2-3 days. But they have been wanting to play some proactive role in this region.
Right.
One example you gave, that Russia invited Taliban to Moscow, and in that discussion also the Afghan government was not invited. Taliban were there, and other representatives from Afghanistan, various walks of life, they were there. Now, China also got involved in Iran recently, as you know.
Yes.
So, China and Russia both want to, so there is a chance, there is a possibility that the vacuum, now withdrawal of President Trump from these talks has created a vacuum, because something must be done, talks should go on. So, maybe there is a chance that Russia and China would step in, and maybe they invite both the parties. Both the parties means, for that, Taliban have to accept that they are ready to talk to the Afghan government. If they don't show willingness, then probably even China and Russia will not be able to do anything.
So, it was Amir, briefly your point. Do you think that we are back to square one, or do you think that perhaps after a month or so, these talks would be back on the track?
Everybody agreed that there's no military solution. So there was a broad agreement that the solution of this Afghan war would be on the table. So I think that is not annulled by the refusal of Mr. Trump. But I think for Pakistan, Pakistan has a very small foreign office as compared to United States, and definitely as compared to America, to the Indians. So the greater subject, the problem at hand is Kashmir. So I think Pakistan would do well at this moment not to embroil itself on two borders, but probably concentrate more on Kashmir as the coming session in UN General Assembly. I think that is the high point of our diplomatic efforts to bring Kashmir to the world's attention. So I think Pakistan should let America decide what it wants to do, come back to it. Pakistan will definitely need its friends in China and Russia to bring back Taliban to table. But in the meantime, I think we need to concentrate on Kashmir.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Dr. Nazir Mahmood, pleasure having you on the show. Here was Mashal Amir. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. That's all from today's show. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.